So over the past few years, buy now, pay later services from companies like Affirm, Klarna, and Afterpay have exploded in popularity. But because of that, we've been seeing some really concerning trends. For example, this year in 2025 for Coachella, around 60% of ticket purchasers used a buy now, pay later plan, or BNPL for short, in order to actually attend that festival. And then just the other month, it was announced that the food delivery service DoorDash was partnering with Klarna to offer, quote, even more convenience with flexible payments, all thanks to new buy now, pay later checkout options. Now, that DoorDash story kind of went viral and led to a bunch of memes about people going into debt for burritos. And some people were even calling an announcement like this a recession indicator because generally people like to turn to debt and other financing options to kind of help make ends meet when times are tough. However, with this rise of buy now, pay later, it might not really be all about people using these services just to cover basic living expenses and survive, but instead, some argue that these payment plans are much more positioned to be a tool that's used to get people to intentionally spend money they wouldn't otherwise spend, even though it can feel like these payment plans are a good deal. So in this video, I want to answer the question, are buy now, pay later services really worth it? Or is this all somehow just a scam that's creating the illusion of financial flexibility when in reality it's just leading to higher and higher levels of consumer debt? All right, so first of all, how does buy now, pay later work and how are companies that offer it even making money? Because it kind of sounds a little too good to be true. So let's say you want to buy some new athleisure clothing and you know that Lululemon is one of the top brands for that. So you go shopping on their website and you add a shirt to your cart, but that shirt is $78, which obviously is a much more premium price point that might be a little bit out of your budget this month. However, you notice that there's a little message there that says, hey, you can either pay $78 right now, or you can make 4 payments of $19.50 with Afterpay or Klarna. So you click on the checkout button because that sounds pretty good, since 4 payments of $19.50 equals $78 exactly, meaning there's no extra interest that you'd have to pay here. Plus, when you look at the payment schedule for this purchase, you would only owe that first $19.50 payment today, and then another payment in 2 weeks, another in 4 weeks, and the fourth and final payment in 6 weeks. And lucky for you and many others, that lines up pretty well with your 2-week paycheck schedule, so those smaller chunks sound better for your cash flow. You can even extend that payment schedule with nothing due today and then only 3 payments of $26.87 per month over 3 months for just a small $2.61 fee, or you can stretch that out even further into 6 payments of $13.77 per month over 6 months for only an extra $4.61. Now, that interest-free option of 4 payments over 6 weeks represents the standard buy now, pay later structure, and then those slightly longer flex pay options are sort of like this other short-term loan with interest that's actually disguised as a small fee. So that's basically how buy now, pay later works, but how are companies that offer these plans actually making money from them? The first way, obviously, is going to be from interest income, which is primarily made up of those small additional fees that BNPL companies charge you on those short-term installment loans. And again, that's really interest that's just disguised as a small fee. Now, when you read the fine print and the disclosures during the full checkout process and you look at those fees as an annual percentage rate or an APR, those fees from the 3 and the 6 month payment plans in our Lululemon example actually work out to be 19.99% as an annual rate. Klarna also says that the APR can go all the way up to 33.99%. So again, like I said, a few extra dollars of interest or fees on a payment plan doesn't sound like that much, but when you spread out those interest payments across millions of users, it adds up to way more revenue for these companies than you might think. We can actually take a look at one of these BNPL companies, which is Affirm, who's publicly traded here in the US, and we could take a look at their financials to see that in the recent 2024 annual 10K filing, they reported total revenue of over $2.3 billion, and more than half of that came from interest income on those loans. That's over $1.2 billion going to just one of these BNPL companies, and these numbers have been rising fast year after year. Then the other main source of revenue for buy now, pay later companies is called merchant fee revenue, which for Affirm in 2024 was around $674 million, or around 29% of its total revenue. And this is going to be the secret way that many of these companies are actually able to make a lot of money from their interest-free payment plans. They do this by not making money from you, but instead by getting paid by the retailers themselves, typically in the amount of around 2 to 8% of a customer's purchase price when they use a BNPL service at checkout. The reason why they're able to make money this way is because they partner with retailers by just telling them, hey, we've got a ton of data on customers who use buy now, pay later, and if you offer our payment plans on your website, then not only are you going to increase the likelihood that a customer completes a purchase, but you're also going to get higher average order values. That means more revenue for the retailers because when given the choice to make a sale but pay a small fee or not make a sale at all, they're going to gladly pay that small merchant fee to Affirm or to Klarna or any of those buy now, pay later companies, because again, they know that psychologically, people are going to be more likely to buy and spend more when given the choice to spread out payments interest-free. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who uses BNPL services is going to be irresponsible with it, just like how I feel that not everyone who uses credit cards is overspending on those. But what I am saying is that at scale and in general, buy now, pay later might not be this sort of financially savvy spending hack that some people are led to believe. And that is going to lead me to part 2 of this video about what exactly exactly the problem is with buy now, pay later. So just like any financial product, whether that's credit cards, mortgages, personal loans, car loans, and stuff like that, the problem with these things many times isn't always the financial product itself, but rather the way it's being used and who is using it. Now, over the recent years, with buy now, pay later growing more and more in popularity, most of these payment plans have not actually been reporting to the credit bureaus, and so the data that we have around this stuff is pretty limited. This has led to buy now, pay later being called phantom debt because right now there's not any real way to know exactly what kind of total balances are out there for these short-term loans. And so even though we know that credit card debt totals around $1.2 trillion right now in the US, after you factor in this phantom debt, that means US consumers probably owe a lot more than we think. That's obviously concerning as fears grow about a recession and because higher prices mean that people are likely going to keep turning more and more towards these different financing options. Now, we are starting to see some buy now, pay later payments getting reported to the credit bureaus, and that's something that's probably going to keep expanding as time goes on here, which hopefully then leads to more transparency around lending with this stuff. But even though the data has been kind of limited up to this point, we did recently see a pretty good report released by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the results were a little bit shocking to see. So a few years ago, the CFPB issued orders to collect information from the big players in the buy now, pay later space like Affirm, Afterpay, Klarna, and even PayPal and more. And what they found reveals what I think is one of the main problems with these short-term payment options. They saw that among consumers with a credit record, 1/5 had used buy now, pay later, and then among those BNPL borrowers, 63% had multiple simultaneous loans during the year, and 33% had short-term loans from multiple lenders. Now, that's not too alarming, even though it does show just how popular these types of loans are. But what this report also found was that nearly 2/3 of buy now, pay later loans went to borrowers with lower credit scores that are in the subprime to deep subprime range. For some context there, the CFPB classifies anyone with a FICO credit score of 580 to 619 as subprime, and then anyone with a score below 580 as deep subprime. And so these borrowers have things on their credit report like missed payments, high balances, many credit inquiries, a shorter credit history, and other things like that. Then by cross-checking data collected from buy now, pay later loans with other credit records, the CFPB report also kind of confirmed these assumptions. So they said that BNPL borrowers were more likely to hold higher balances on other credit accounts, and they said that younger borrowers held more in buy now, pay later debt as a percentage of their total consumer debt. There's a lot of other interesting findings from that report, so I'll go ahead and leave a link to it down below if you want to check it out for yourself. But a big thing to know about the data from this report is that it was based off data collected from 2022, and so imagine now what that data would look like here in 2025 as these services are obviously even more common, like we talked about with the Coachella and the DoorDash stories. The fact is, with the way that buy now, pay later works, by instantly approving people on a purchase by purchase basis with just a soft credit check and no minimum credit score, that becomes dangerous because again, you're basically kind of feeding this short-term consumer debt machine with interest fees, late fees from some providers if you start missing payments, or the hidden risk of overspending due to the illusion that you're doing the smart thing by spreading out your payments. Again though, not everyone or every situation is gonna be a victim here, and there's probably some cases where, like most things, it's fine to use buy now, pay later in moderation, but don't forget that the merchant fee business model here literally only exists because it's based on data that people will spend more and will check out at higher rates with these services. Otherwise, there's pretty much no incentive for retailers to continue offering these payment plans. The same is true for credit cards as well, and for that matter, even car loans and mortgages. So people are constantly using debt to buy things they can't actually afford or don't really need, and so this video here is just about raising awareness about what buy now, pay later is really all about. So if you're considering using buy now, pay later, here's 3 questions that you should ask yourself to know if it's going to be worth it for you. Number 1, do you have any other active BNPL loans at the moment? Because if you do, then I'd say that managing multiple payment plans is really not going to be worth the headache, and it's also not worth creating the habit of relying on these plans. Number 2, do you have a history of missing payments on any type of short-term loan or credit card? Because if you do have previous missed payments, then the fact is that history could repeat itself and you might get hit with late fees or penalties. So for this, you really got to just be honest with yourself, which is a tough thing to do. And then number 3, do you have at least 1 month's worth of expenses saved up in your checking account and then another 3 to 6 months worth of expenses saved in an emergency fund? If you don't, then you might be using buy now, pay later to basically finance your life in between paychecks, which sounds better than getting into high interest credit card debt. But again, it's really not always necessary, and you should probably start prioritizing creating that margin of safety with some savings first here instead of just getting by with buy now, pay later. Now, if you've answered those questions and you're still thinking about using a buy now, pay later service, I want you to at least consider using an almost identical strategy instead that I personally think is going to be a much healthier long-term financial solution for most people. And that is going to be something that I call save now, pay later. With save now, pay later, the mechanics are going to work very similar when it comes to those 4-payment 6-week plans. However, instead of making one payment and then getting whatever item you want to buy today, and then making another payment in 2 weeks, another one in 4 weeks, and then one final one in 6 weeks with BNPL, for SNPL, you're going to set aside one payment today into a savings account and then not get the item you want at this exact moment. Then you set aside another payment in 2 weeks, another one in 4 weeks, and then in 6 weeks, when you have that fourth and final payment, then you're able to go out and actually buy that item. This helps to fight back against a big problem that I see with buy now, pay later services, which is the problem of instant gratification that too many people fall victim to in today's world that's so focused on consumerism. So with save now, pay later, it's really all about simply shifting when you actually get to receive and enjoy the item you want to buy by just delaying that by 6 weeks. What you're going to find by doing this is that, first of all, 6 weeks is really not that long of a time to wait for something. And then second of all, after 6 weeks have passed, you might not even actually want to spend money on that thing anymore because now all the impulsive urges have kind of died down at that point. Now, using buy now, pay later on food spending for impulsive hunger is going to be a bit different, obviously. So I think you should kind of just ignore financing your pizza delivery through DoorDash. But even for other stuff like concerts, sports games, travel, or whatever else you want to buy with a flexible payment plan, try thinking of other cheaper alternatives or other substitutes that you can spend money on instead, which is going to be my next piece of advice here. When it comes to substitutes, most people tend to forget to look at buying last year's tech or last year's clothing styles because retailers are always constantly pushing the latest and the greatest things they have on their shelves. But the truth is that last year's products, used items, certified refurbished things, or even stuff you might find on eBay, those are going to be where the real deals are, where you can actually start to save money on the purchase price instead of just trying to manipulate and spread out that price. Also, if you have a credit card, then you can even use that to pay for these cheaper purchases because as long as you pay off that card on time and in full by the payment due date, you can actually avoid interest altogether while still having several weeks to pay that back depending on the timing of your billing cycle. Also, for anyone who says that it makes sense to use buy now, pay later with 0 interest over 6 weeks to make a purchase today and then kind of invest the difference to make a profit as you pay that off, just stop, because honestly, that's not a real investing strategy, and that's not something that's going to have any sort of material effect on wealth building because 6 weeks is just too short of a time frame to even be called investing. Yes, you could earn interest in a high yield savings account or some other short-term thing just by making one payment today and then paying off the rest of that BNPL purchase over 6 weeks. But you can also do that exact same thing with the save now, pay later strategy that I just talked about. So again, many times it actually comes down to people wanting that instant gratification instead of delayed gratification. Again, just to be clear, I'm not talking about the times when people use these services occasionally to make things work for things they actually need to buy in between paychecks. So it's going to be up to each person to ask the right questions and be honest with why they're actually using buy now, pay later over any of the other strategies that I've talked about here in this video. There's definitely downsides to any payment option, including buy now, pay later, credit cards, debit cards, and even cash. So it's kind of all about weighing the pros with the cons of each option you have while not putting yourself at risk of overspending or even going into debt. For me personally, I prefer to stick with credit cards and a good budget because I know I'm going to be able to spend the exact money that I want to spend while also then benefiting from some of the protections and the rewards that my credit cards offer me, which most buy now, pay later services just don't have. So if you want to learn more about how exactly I budget and use credit cards strategically in my own life, then you can go ahead and check out either one of these videos on the screen next. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.